All right, so buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving deep into a topic that is sure to get those synapses firing.
Oh, yeah. This one is a biggie.
We're talking about free will, or more specifically.
Maybe the lack of it.
Right. And we are going to be exploring this idea using excerpts from a book that digs into how much our biology and environment shape.
Well, everything, really.
Yeah, it suggests that maybe we don't have as much control over our choices.
As we think we do.
Exactly. So to kick things off,
Yeah.
this book uses a pretty wild analogy to illustrate this concept. They talk about biological turtles all the way down.
Ah, yeah, that's a good one.
So what's the deal with those turtles?
Well, imagine this. Every action you take, every decision you make, it's all the result of countless factors.
Like what kind of factors?
I mean, everything, your genes, your upbringing, your environment, the things you've experienced, even what you had for breakfast this morning. It all plays a role.
Wow, so it's like a chain reaction.
Exactly. And the book argues that free will, as we traditionally think of it, doesn't really exist. It's not some magical force intervening. It's just this continuous chain of influences, these biological totals stacked on top of each other forever.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get the picture, but then how do we explain things that seem totally random, like chance encounters or spontaneous decisions?
Well, the book dives into that too. It brings up the concept of deterministic rules, which basically means that even in seemingly random events, there are underlying principles governing them.
So even chaos has its own set of rules.
Exactly. Take the weather, for example. It might seem unpredictable, but it's still governed by the laws of physics and atmospheric conditions.
Yeah.
We might not be able to predict every single gust of wind, but the underlying cause and effect relationships are always there.
That's pretty mind-blowing to think about, but doesn't this kind of make us sound like robots just blindly following a script?
Well, that's where things get really interesting, because the book also explores a bunch of fascinating experiments about free will that challenge our assumptions.
Like what kind of experiments?
One example is a thought experiment where a professor tries to predict which student will pick up a pen during class.
Okay, how do they do that?
The professor considers a ton of factors like the student's biology, are they hungry, are they tired, their environment where they're sitting, what happened to them earlier in the day, and even things like their personality traits and past behaviors.
So they're basically trying to account for all the hidden influences that might be shaping the student's seemingly simple choice.
Exactly. And the idea is that even something as mundane as picking up a pen can be influenced by a complex web of factors that we might not even be aware of.
I'm already starting to second-guess every decision I've ever made.
We'll just wait. There's more.
Yeah.
The book also talks about experiments where researchers actually manipulate people's belief in free will.
Wait, they can do that?
Yep. In these studies, they have people read passages that argue against free will, often using the work of Francis Crick.
Oh, the famous neuroscientist.
That's the one. And what they found is that when you prime people to doubt free will, it can actually change their brain activity and behavior.
No way! Seriously?
Yeah, they show less intention and effort in tasks. It's like they're on autopilot a bit more.
So basically reading one article can turn me into a couch potato.
Hold on. It's not quite that dramatic.
Okay, good, because I was about to cancel my gym membership.
The changes are subtle, and more research is definitely needed, but some studies have shown a correlation between decreased belief. Well, the idea is that if questioning free will could lead to people acting immorally, would the same be true for not believing in a God who punishes bad behavior?
I see where you're going with this. So it's like both situations challenge our traditional notions of morality and responsibility.
Exactly. And the book highlights the fact that there's a lot of prejudice against atheists, a lot of assumptions that they can't be moral without belief in a higher power.
And we know that kind of prejudice can have real-world consequences. It can affect people's jobs, their relationships, even their safety.
Absolutely. It's a powerful example of how much we as a society tend to tie morality to specific beliefs. But here's the thing. Is there any actual evidence that atheists are less moral?
That's a good question. How do you even study something like that?
That's where things get tricky, because you can't just randomly assign people to be religious or not religious. There's so many other factors that could influence their behavior.
Like what kind of factors?
Things like demographics, age, gender, socioeconomic status, social networks. All of that can play a role in how likely someone is to be helpful or generous, regardless of their religious beliefs.
How it's like a giant puzzle with all these interconnected pieces.
Exactly. And to make things even more complicated, a lot of the research on this topic relies on self-reporting, which means people are simply asked about their beliefs and actions.
But people don't always tell the truth, right? Especially when it comes to sensitive topics like religion and morality.
Exactly. They might want to present themselves in a more favorable light. So a religious person might exaggerate their good deeds, while an atheist might downplay theirs.
So we can't just take people's word for it. We need to look at their actual behavior.
Exactly. We need to see those actions in the real world to get a clear picture of what's really going on and what happens when we do that. Well, let's dive into that next time.
Stay tuned because we are just getting started. Okay, so last time we left off talking about how tricky it is to really know if atheists are less moral than religious people. You said we need to look beyond what people say they do and actually see their actions, right?
Yeah, exactly. Words and actions don't always match up, you know.
So what happens when we actually observe behavior?
Well, the book points out some interesting findings. When it comes to things like donating blood, being honest when they could get away with cheating.
You mean like in those experiments where they tempt people to lie?
Exactly, yeah. Or even just simple stuff like tipping. There's often no real difference between how atheists and theists behave.
Huh. So that stereotype about atheists being like morally bankrupt just doesn't hold water.
It's more complicated than that. I mean, some studies do suggest that, on average, religious folks do more things that benefit others.
Pro-social behavior, right. We talked about that before.
Yeah, but there's a catch. The book argues that this generosity often has a limit. It's mostly directed towards people within their own religious group.
Oh, interesting. So it's like they're more likely to help fellow believers than people outside their religion.
Right. Whereas atheists, on the other hand, tend to show more generosity towards people who are different from them, more accepting, you know.
That's a pretty big distinction. So maybe being religious doesn't necessarily make you a better person overall. It just kind of shifts who you're more likely to help.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And the book suggests this whole in-group versus out-group thing might actually relate to how we think about free will, too.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. How so?
Well, think about it. Is it really a black and white issue? Either you totally believe in free will or you don't.
I guess not. Most people probably fall somewhere in between, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's more like a spectrum. On one end, you've got the diehard free will believers convinced that every choice is 100% theirs. Then on the other end, you've got the determinists who think pretty much everything is predetermined. No real choice involved.
Like fate, destiny, that kind of thing. No room for free will at all.
That's the basic idea, yeah.
Mm.
But the book points out that most folks actually fall somewhere in the middle. They're not totally committed to either extreme. It's what they call the malleable middle.
Malleable, so like their beliefs can be influenced pretty easily.
That's it. These are people whose views about free will could shift depending on what they're reading, who they're talking to, external stuff.
Like in those experiments we discussed, where they had people read passages arguing against free will.
Exactly. And those studies often found that it was the folks in this malleable middle who were most likely to act kind of unethically after their belief in free will got weakened.
So at first glance, that seems to support the idea that questioning free will leads to bad behavior, right? But I remember you said there's a nuance to those findings.
Oh, there definitely is. Those studies focused on people whose beliefs were easy to change. But what about people with super strong convictions, either for or against free will? The book mentions a study that compared strong believers to committed determinists, people who've really thought this through.
I'm on the edge of my seat. Did the determinists all turn out to be criminals?
Not even close. There was no difference in their ethical behavior. Both groups were equally moral. What the study actually found to be way more important than belief in free will was having a strong moral identity.
Wow, that's powerful. So it's not so much about whether you think you have free will, it's about whether you value being a good person deep down.
But that seems to be the takeaway. And it really connects back to what we were discussing about atheism and morality. Just like deeply committed atheists and religious folks often have similar levels of conscientiousness, strong free will skeptics and believers can both be upstanding individuals. It's about who they are at their core.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture, but if believing in free will isn't the key to a moral society, then what is?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The book doesn't give us a simple answer, but it hints that maybe we've been focused on the wrong thing all along. Instead of trying to force specific beliefs on people, whether it's about free will or religion,
we should be helping them develop a solid sense of morality.
Exactly. Help them understand what it means to be good, why it matters, regardless of what they believe about fate or free will.
This has been such a whirlwind. We've questioned the very nature of choice, looked at how beliefs and actions intertwine, and now we're talking about building a more moral society.
And we're not done yet. Remember how we talked about religious folks being more generous to their own group? Well, the book goes even deeper into that, and it gets really fascinating.
You've got me hooked. Tell me more. Okay, so we're back and ready to unpack this idea of religious folks often favoring their own group. It really makes you think, like, could those who believe in free will do the same thing? Could that play a part in all this?
That's a good question. The book doesn't directly tackle that specific angle, but it does give us some hints that might lead us down that path. Remember when we talked about different moral values, like obedience, loyalty, fairness, and preventing harm?
Yeah, and how those values often align with people's, well, political and religious leanings, like different moral compasses guiding their actions.
Exactly. The book points to research suggesting that folks who put a lot of emphasis on obedience and loyalty, well, they might be more likely to see free will as essential for a moral society.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it makes sense. Because if people aren't really choosing their actions, then how can you hold them accountable for breaking the rules? It just wouldn't be fair.
Precisely.
I-
For those folks who prioritize keeping things orderly and sticking to the norms, the idea that our actions might be predetermined, well, that could shake them up a bit. Challenges their whole worldview.
But then, wouldn't it also make sense that those who prioritize fairness and preventing harm might be more open to the idea of determinism? Like, if we accept that people's actions are influenced by things beyond their control, maybe we can be more understanding, more forgiving even.
That's a really interesting point. It suggests that our beliefs about free will could actually shape how we think about justice. If we believe everyone's got total control, we might lean towards punishment. But if we see behavior as influenced by outside forces, maybe we favor rehabilitation and understanding.
So it's not just some theoretical debate. It has real implications for how we treat each other, how we build a just society.
Absolutely. Makes you stop and think. How are my own beliefs about free will shaping my moral judgments, my actions? Am I being too quick to judge? Too lenient? It's a tough one for sure.
This deep dive has been a real mind bender. We've questioned the very idea of choice, explored the tangled web of beliefs and actions, and even wrestled with what it means to build a more moral society. It's been quite a journey.
It has. But, even with all this complexity, the book ends on a really hopeful note.
Hopeful,
Yeah.
really. Even when we're talking about determinism, the idea that we might not have as much control as we thought, I'm all ears.
Well, the book reminds us that whether or not we have free will in that traditional sense, we still have the capacity to make choices that line up with our values. We can choose to be responsible, strive for fairness and compassion, and actively work towards a better world.
So even if our actions are the result of, like, a chain of influences, we can still choose to be good people, contribute to society. We're not just along for the ride.
Exactly. The book leaves us with this powerful message. We may not be the sole authors of our destiny, but we can definitely choose to be the heroes of our own stories.
That's a beautiful way to put it. So listeners, as you navigate your own lives, remember, even in a world where things might be predetermined, your choices still matter. They have impact.
Choose wisely. Choose compassionately. Choose to make a difference.
And that wraps up our deep dive into free will, determinism, and morality. We hope this episode gave you plenty to ponder, maybe even spark some interesting conversations. Keep exploring those big questions, keep diving deep.